Shadows of the Louisiana Plantation. 1860. In the sweltering summer of 1860, the Redford Plantation lay deep in the heart of Louisiana, where the Mississippi's humid winds carried both the scent of cotton fields and the secrets of a family long whispered about in hushed tones. The mansion, whitewashed and towering, stood like a sentinel over rows of enslaved laborers, bending under the scorching sun. Behind its grand facade lived the patriarch Jeremiah Redford, a man whose reputation for cruelty was known even beyond the state lines. Yet, even among his peers, his latest actions would cross a line that most refused to speak of aloud. Jeremiah was a widower with two daughters, Caroline and Elizabeth, both strikingly beautiful and barely in their 20s. They were raised in luxury, their every whim attended to by servants and slaves alike. Yet beneath the veneer of refinement, there was an atmosphere of fear and rigid obedience. Jeremiah's obsession with wealth and the expansion of his plantation had grown over the years, and with it, a sinister plan that would forever scar the family and its enslaved community. By 1860, the demand for slave labor had surged across the South. Plantation owners sought to expand their holdings, and the value of enslaved women capable of bearing children had become almost a currency in itself. Jeremiah, obsessed with both control and profit, conceived a plan so perverse that it would leave a mark on history. He would use his own daughters to produce a new generation of slaves, ensuring both the continuation of his labor force and the consolidation of his wealth. The first whispers among the enslaved community began when Caroline was brought to a private wing of the mansion, away from prying eyes. A young man named Samuel, purchased years earlier for his strength and obedience, became the focus of Jeremiah's twisted scheme. The men who served under Samuel dared not speak of it, yet every glance and whispered warning confirmed their deepest fears. The Redford daughters were no longer only heirs to a fortune. They were instruments of their father's cruelty. Caroline's reaction was a mix of confusion, fear, and a strange resignation. Having been raised in a strict household where obedience to her father was absolute, she knew refusal would bring punishment beyond comprehension. Elizabeth, observing her sister's quiet suffering, realized that her own fate might follow the same horrifying path. Both sisters, isolated from any outside counsel, were trapped in a gilded cage built not of iron, but of fear, expectation, and a father's twisted ambitions. The process was subtle at first. Private lessons, seemingly innocent, masked a darker reality. Samuel, who had been accustomed to the harsh treatment of the plantation, now bore the weight of unimaginable demand. Yet his obedience, forged over years of survival, left him powerless to resist. The first time the act was forced, Caroline retreated into herself, her laughter and liveliness disappearing under a shadow that would never lift. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, helpless to intervene, knowing her father's wrath was swift and merciless. As weeks passed, the plantation workers began to notice changes. Caroline's once radiant complexion became pale and sallow. Elizabeth's nights were restless, haunted by the knowledge of what awaited her. The air of opulence in the mansion was punctured by the muffled cries of those caught in Jeremiah's web. The enslaved women spoke in whispers, offering small gestures of comfort where they could, but the fear of punishment kept them silent for the most part. In the quiet hours of the night, Jeremiah would patrol the halls, his presence looming like a specter. He would check the rooms of his daughters, ensuring his instructions were followed, and remind them that their obedience would guarantee the future of the plantation. Every corner of the mansion echoed with control and terror, a reminder that in Redford, power belonged solely to the patriarch. By the end of the first summer, Caroline's body had begun to show signs of the unnatural burden placed upon her. The first pregnancy, a cruel testament to her father's plan, marked the beginning of a cycle that would continue until both daughters were bearing children fathered by Samuel. The mansion, with its grand halls and lush gardens, became a theater of suffering, masked behind polite greetings and the facade of genteel society. Even among the Redford peers, rumors circulated, though none dared confront Jeremiah. Some whispered of the daughter's strange isolation, of Samuel's constant presence at the mansion, and of the empty, haunted eyes that Caroline and Elizabeth now bore. But gossip in the South often had little power. It was a culture built on silence, on turning away, and on complicity. The true horror remained confined within the walls of the Redford estate, a secret that could destroy reputations if ever exposed. As the harvest approached, the weight of history pressed upon every soul on the plantation. The cotton bolls, heavy with fiber, mirrored the burden of secrecy and terror in the mansion. Jeremiah walked the rows, counting both crops and lives as if they were interchangeable. To him, the future was secured not through love or compassion, but through control, manipulation, and the exploitation of those closest to him. By the time autumn arrived, Caroline's pregnancy had progressed visibly. She moved through the mansion with a careful, measured grace, a silent witness to her own suffering. Elizabeth, meanwhile, lived in dread of the day her father would summon her, knowing that her fate might soon mirror her sister's. The servants whispered prayers in corners, offering small gestures of hope, though all knew that true salvation was impossible in a place governed by such tyranny. The Redford plantation, outwardly a picture of Southern wealth and refinement, had become a crucible of human suffering. In its halls, history itself seemed to pause recording the unfolding tragedy of two young women whose lives had been stolen, and of a man whose greed and cruelty would echo long after the cotton had been harvested and the summer sun faded from the Louisiana sky. As winter approached, the Redford plantation became quieter, yet tension hung in the air like thick fog. The cotton fields lay dormant, the slaves' labor slowed by cold winds, but inside the mansion, the operations of Jeremiah's cruel design never paused. Caroline's pregnancy advanced rapidly, her body bearing the visible mark of her father's plan. Elizabeth, forced into careful observation, lived in constant dread, anticipating the day Jeremiah would turn his obsession toward her. Samuel, the young man trapped in this nightmare, moved silently through the mansion, a shadow of his former self. Once strong and unyielding, he now carried the weight of guilt, fear, and helplessness. The enslaved community, knowing but unable to intervene, watched from a distance, their whispers only providing fleeting comfort. No one dared speak too loudly. No one dared act. Jeremiah's reach was absolute, his presence suffocating. The first signs of real rebellion came not from the enslaved, but from the daughters themselves. Caroline, though broken in body, began to resist silently. She refused to meet her father's eyes, and her spirit, though wounded, flickered with the faintest glimmer of defiance. Elizabeth, learning from her sister's quiet courage, attempted to find solace in books, hiding in the library late at night, hoping that knowledge might offer a sliver of freedom. But the mansion had no escape. Every corridor, every locked door, reminded them that they were prisoners of both family and fortune. One evening, Jeremiah summoned Caroline to the parlor under the guise of discussing plantation affairs. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. Jeremiah's presence filled the space, a constant reminder of control. Samuel, as always, stood nearby, the object of the patriarch's dark plan. Caroline's heart pounded as she realized this was no ordinary conversation. "Caroline," Jeremiah began, his voice calm but cold, "you understand your duty to this family and its future, do you not?" Caroline's voice trembled. "Yes, father," she whispered, though inside her mind screamed. She understood that her compliance meant the continuation of a nightmare, yet resistance could mean punishment far worse than childbirth itself. Jeremiah smiled, a chilling display of satisfaction. "Good. You must remember, every action you take strengthens this plantation, secures its future, and ensures that our name endures." His eyes lingered on Samuel, then on Caroline, making clear the unspoken threat of defiance. The psychological toll of Jeremiah's cruelty was evident. Caroline's days were consumed with fear, her nights with anxiety, and a strange, growing detachment from reality. Elizabeth observed silently, learning the patterns, anticipating her own inevitable turn. The mansion itself seemed alive with the whispers of past victims, the walls echoing secrets and suppressed cries. Even the servants, hardened by years of toil, could feel the oppressive weight of despair that clung to every corner. By midwinter, Caroline's condition had visibly advanced. The first child of Samuel and Caroline would soon be born, a living testament to the patriarch's grotesque vision. Elizabeth, now constantly shadowed by both fear and grief, struggled to maintain her composure. Their youth had been stolen, replaced with a cruel apprenticeship in survival under the most twisted of circumstances. One fateful night, as a storm raged outside, the mansion seemed to groan under the wind's assault. Caroline's labor began earlier than expected, and the mansion descended into chaos. Servants rushed to assist, but Jeremiah, ever controlling, insisted on overseeing every detail. Samuel, powerless to intervene in any meaningful way, watched in silent horror as Caroline endured both physical agony and emotional torment. The child, a girl, was born into a world already shaped by fear, her cries echoing off the mansion walls. Jeremiah's face remained impassive, his satisfaction evident, while Caroline lay exhausted and trembling. Elizabeth, hiding nearby, felt the full weight of her father's plan. The cycle had begun, and she realized that her own life would follow the same terrifying path. In the days following the birth, the mansion's atmosphere grew darker. The Redford daughters moved like ghosts, their laughter and youth drained completely. Caroline nursed her child under strict supervision, while Jeremiah's influence extended to every corner of the home. The enslaved women, who had offered fleeting comfort during the pregnancy, continued to whisper prayers and warnings, knowing that their attempts to interfere could bring death. Amidst the horror, Elizabeth began to quietly document the events, writing down observations, incidents, and patterns in a hidden journal. It was a small act of defiance, a seed of resistance that might one day preserve the truth of what had occurred. Her words captured not only the mechanics of her father's cruelty, but the psychological toll on all involved, the daughters, Samuel, and even the silent witnesses among the enslaved. By spring, the plantation resumed its outward appearance of order. Cotton fields thrived, the mansion gleamed, and Jeremiah's peers continued to admire his wealth and control. Yet beneath the surface, the legacy of trauma had already taken root. Caroline's body and spirit bore the permanent mark of her father's plan. Elizabeth prepared herself, knowing her own turn was inevitable, and Samuel remained a hollow figure, enslaved by circumstance and fear. The Redford plantation had become a chilling illustration of power, greed, and cruelty. It stood as a monument not to prosperity, but to the exploitation and corruption of family, body, and soul. And while the public face of the mansion suggested refinement and wealth, the private reality revealed the darkest depths of human ambition. Even years later, the whispers of the Redford daughters' suffering persisted, carried through generations. The children born from the father's design would inherit both the wealth of the plantation and the haunting shadow of how it was obtained. And though Jeremiah believed his control absolute, history would remember not the wealth he amassed, but the terror he inflicted upon his own blood and those enslaved under his command. Spring deepened into summer, and the Redford plantation, outwardly pristine, carried the weight of unseen suffering. Caroline, now recovering from the trauma of childbirth, moved through the halls like a shadow, her child in her arms, a living reminder of her father's cruel design. Elizabeth, watching her sister, understood with chilling clarity that her own fate was not far behind. Jeremiah's obsession, once subtle, had begun to focus fully on Elizabeth, whose quiet intelligence and beauty made her the perfect instrument for his plans. Elizabeth's days became a careful exercise in survival. She learned to anticipate her father's moods, to avoid the triggers that could bring him into a rage. Every action was measured, every word weighed. The mansion, which once seemed a place of privilege, had transformed into a labyrinth of fear and manipulation. Even the servants, many of whom had grown accustomed to Jaramir's tyranny, were unsettled by the increasing intensity of his control over his daughters. One evening, Jaramir summoned Elizabeth to the nursery where Caroline's child slept. The firelight flickered across his face, emphasizing the cold, calculating expression that had haunted both daughters since childhood. Samuel stood silently, a constant reminder of the unthinkable acts that had already begun. Elizabeth, trembling yet determined, met her father's gaze, though she tried to mask her fear. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice smooth but commanding, "you have watched and learned. You understand the duty of this family. Soon, it will be your turn to secure our future, as your sister has done." Elizabeth swallowed hard, the words sinking into her like stones. Her mind raced, weighing the consequences of obedience versus rebellion. To resist could mean punishment, perhaps death. To comply would condemn her body and spirit to the same horrors her sister endured. Yet, within her, a spark of defiance began to take shape, not overt, not yet, but enough to survive in the shadows. Over the following weeks, Jaramir's plans progressed. Elizabeth was confined to her room more frequently, ostensibly to prepare for the responsibilities he claimed were hers. In reality, these were lessons in control, in submission, and in obedience to his perverse design. The servants whispered caution, warning her of the dangers of attempting escape or rebellion. But escape was nearly impossible. The plantation lay deep in Louisiana swampland, far from towns or roads, and Jaramir's vigilance ensured that no one could leave unnoticed. Samuel, increasingly despondent, moved like a ghost through the mansion. His presence was both a reminder and a tool in Jaramir's cruel scheme. He had no power to refuse, and yet every act of obedience tormented him further. The enslaved community, though sympathetic, remained powerless. Their whispers of comfort and hope were small gestures, unable to alter the grim reality. Elizabeth began to notice subtle cracks in the system. The servants, while fearful, had small acts of quiet rebellion, hidden messages, small favors, brief diversions that offered glimpses of support. These acts, though minor, gave Elizabeth a sense of connection, a realization that she was not entirely alone. It was a fragile lifeline, one that required secrecy and vigilance to maintain. By midsummer, Jaramir's plan reached its next phase. Elizabeth was now considered ready to bear the child that would continue the plantation's labor force. Another generation bound by cruelty. The psychological weight was immense. Elizabeth's nights were sleepless, haunted by visions of her sister suffering, and the knowledge that her own body would soon endure similar torment. The mansion, once a place of elegance and status, had become a prison of dread and manipulation. Caroline, though physically recovering, was emotionally fractured. Her relationship with Elizabeth shifted subtly, from sisterly closeness to a shared understanding of survival under tyranny. The children born of Jaramir's design were both blessings and curses, innocent lives, enmeshed in a system of cruelty they could not yet comprehend. Caroline attempted to guide Elizabeth, teaching her how to navigate the twisted reality of their lives, offering advice that was both practical and heartbreaking. One night, Elizabeth discovered her father had begun keeping meticulous records of the daughters' pregnancies, Samuel's role, and even the anticipated value of each child once they were old enough to work the fields. The realization struck her with horror. Jeremiah had not merely intended to control. They were instruments in a financial and strategic plan, their humanity irrelevant. The mansion's walls, silent witnesses to countless horrors, seemed to close in, emphasizing the inescapable nature of their imprisonment. As the second pregnancy approached, Elizabeth made a quiet, dangerous decision. While outwardly compliant, she began documenting everything in secret: her observations, her sister's suffering, the enslaved workers' whispered warnings, and even her father's detailed notes. The journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of her room, became a small act of resistance, a testament to memory, truth, and the hope that someday the story might be known. Samuel, increasingly hollowed by despair, silently observed Elizabeth's quiet defiance. While he remained powerless to act, the knowledge that someone recognized the horror gave him a faint sense of solidarity. For the first time in months, he felt a subtle flicker of hope that the cycle of cruelty could someday be revealed, if not stopped. By the end of summer, Elizabeth's physical condition confirmed the reality of her father's plan. The second generation of children for the Redford plantation was inevitable, a grotesque continuation of his legacy. Yet within Elizabeth, the spark of defiance had grown into a quiet flame. She had begun to understand the power of observation, of recording truth, and of surviving mentally even as her body was forced into obedience. The Redford mansion, still gleaming in the southern sunlight, concealed layers of terror that would remain hidden from the public eye. The enslaved laborers carried their own scars. The daughters bore physical and emotional wounds, and Samuel's silent suffering echoed through the halls. History, in its most private form, was being written within those walls, not by acts of heroism or love, but by endurance, observation, and survival under the most horrifying of circumstances. Autumn arrived, and the Redford plantation bore the outward trappings of order and wealth. Cotton fields stretched toward the horizon, and the mansion, immaculate as ever, reflected the prosperity of its owner. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the true story of Redford remained hidden, etched in the bodies, minds, and spirits of those who lived within its walls. Caroline and Elizabeth were no longer mere daughters. They were instruments of a plan so cruel it seemed unimaginable. Elizabeth's pregnancy progressed under careful watch, the mansion's halls echoing with the rhythm of control. Jeremiah monitored every detail, counting not only crops and profits, but also the unborn children, calculating their potential as future labor. The enslaved women, now fully aware of the full scope of the patriarch's scheme, whispered prayers and warnings in hushed corners, hoping for small miracles they knew might never come. Elizabeth, though physically burdened, retained a quiet resilience. Her secret journal remained hidden, a lifeline of memory and resistance. She documented every moment the methods of control, the reactions of Samuel, the hidden gestures of sympathy from the enslaved, and the subtle ways she and Carolyn attempted to survive. The act of writing gave her strength, a sense of purpose amidst despair, and a small hope that the truth might someday be revealed. Carolyn, already mother to Jeremiah's first child, attempted to prepare Elizabeth for what lay ahead. She spoke in whispers late at night, her voice heavy with both love and sorrow. "You must survive, Lizzie," she said. "Remember who you are. Don't let him take everything from you." The bond between the sisters, though strained by trauma, became a source of endurance. They shared an understanding that neither could express fully, yet it sustained them through the endless days of manipulation and fear. As winter approached, Elizabeth gave birth to her child, a girl, under the same cruel oversight her sister had endured. The cries of the infant mingled with Caroline's child, a chorus of innocence surrounded by exploitation. Jeremiah, ever meticulous, recorded the event with satisfaction, noting the continuation of his plan. Yet even he could not suppress the small, subtle acts of defiance. Caroline's soft songs to her child, Elizabeth's whispered prayers, Samuel's silent protectiveness when possible. The birth marked both an ending and a beginning. The Redford daughters had survived their father's perverse ambitions, yet at great cost. Their bodies and spirits bore the marks of manipulation and abuse. Samuel, hollowed but present, remained a witness and unwilling participant. The enslaved workers carried the story silently, their lives intertwined with the Redford legacy of cruelty and control. Despite the horrors, a fragile thread of hope persisted. Elizabeth's journal remained hidden, a record of truth, a potential testament for the future. Caroline and Elizabeth, while forever altered, had survived and retained some measure of autonomy in their thoughts, memories, and acts of quiet rebellion. In their silence, they created a small, enduring resistance against the absolute control of Jeremiah. The children, born into this oppressive system, were destined to inherit both wealth and trauma. Yet the seeds of awareness had been planted. Elizabeth's writings, if discovered, could reveal the hidden reality of Redford Plantation, its cruelty, its manipulation, and the endurance of those who suffered within its walls. History, though often written by the powerful, had been quietly observed, documented, and preserved by those who lived through its darkest chapters. Jeremiah, confident in his control, could not foresee the full consequences of his actions. The mansion, its halls polished and rooms grand, hid the scars of human suffering. The daughters, the children, and Samuel carried these scars forward, a living testament to the perverse intersection of wealth, power, and cruelty. The Redford Plantation would remain a symbol of Southern prosperity, but its private history hidden from public view would tell a far darker tale. In the years that followed, Caroline and Elizabeth navigated their lives under Jeremiah's watch, their resilience and quiet defiance offering small victories in a landscape dominated by oppression. Samuel remained at the plantation, a silent figure whose endurance was a testament to the human capacity to survive under unimaginable conditions. The enslaved workers, while still trapped in a system of cruelty, bore witness to the unfolding story, their memory serving as an invisible record of resistance and survival. The Redford daughters, scarred yet unbroken, embodied the duality of survival under tyranny. Their lives, though forever altered, were a quiet rebellion, an assertion that even in the depths of cruelty, the human spirit could endure. Jeremiah's ambition had created wealth and control, but it had also created witnesses, memories, and a story that would one day emerge, revealing the full horror and the quiet strength of those who had lived it. And so, the legacy of Redford Plantation remained a story of power, cruelty, and survival, recorded in whispers, journals, and memories, waiting for the world to uncover what had been carefully hidden behind the mansion's grand facade. The daughters, the children, Samuel, and the enslaved workers carried forward a truth that could not be erased, that even in the darkest chapters of history, endurance, quiet defiance, and human resilience persisted.